All right. Hopefully, everyone's gonna be able to join here. We're gonna give a few minutes just as or a couple kind of 90 seconds here as everyone flows in. Appreciate everyone taking a few minutes here on a Thursday on December 4th to join Brian and I for the first morning consult AI Spotlight. You'll have to at least give us a little bit of grace here as we kind of work through the mechanics of it. But one of the goals I had mentioned to Brian was we really want to make sure that we are focused on highlighting the work we do with partners. And I think one of the things that stands out about AI is that, in particular for Morning Consult, on a daily basis, we collect 30,000 interviews around the world, and we've done 100 million interviews. There's a multitude of ways in which you can use that data. And I think we're incredibly grateful for the partners that we've been able to build, like Edelman. And so we're excited to have, which is sort of meant to be, I guess, like the opposite of a panel, like a two executives talking about AI. So the hope is that this is pretty free flowing. The overarching goal is that you learn something and something practical, and then we're actually talking about implementation. We're talking about things that really help you do your job. And so whether that's on client side or in other capacities, we want to make sure that this is practical. The overarching structure of this, there's a Q&A function to it. So we're going to try and weave in the Q&A into the discussion. So hopefully we can have a tight 30 minutes here for everyone. But in addition, we'll also obviously follow up with anyone that asks a Q&A question, whether it's for Edelman or for Morning Consult. So without further ado, and in the spirit of kind of a open-ended, wide-ranging two executives talking about AI. I'm really excited to welcome Brian Buchwald, who is currently the president of Global Transformation and Performance at Edelman. But you had come in 3 years ago, almost perfectly timed with the launch of ChatGPT 3.0. And you've previously been the global head of product and trust and data technology, and obviously the global chair of AI and product. And so I'm just really excited to welcome Brian. And I think we could spend 30 minutes just about the incredible diverse experiences you have throughout your career, from DoubleClick to launching a analytics startup in China. But maybe for just a kickoff question to get this going conversationally, we just passed the 3-year anniversary of ChatGPT 3.0's launch. That was not the beginning of the work that many of us have been doing on machine learning and artificial intelligence. But it certainly feels like a marker. And I guess I'm just kind of curious, like that feels like forever ago. That feels like yesterday. Like, how do you think about like the last 3 years? And is that the wrong milestone?
Yeah, I guess I have the benefit now of being old, so I can look at things through larger or longer context windows. And well, first, and thank you for having me here. We were joking that this is the first of the fireside chats, and this is probably going to feel like the early episodes of The Simpsons in like 5 seasons. And like we were like the stick figures who could barely make the mouth work at the same time as the voice. Um, Generative AI is obviously something that is relatively new in terms of how we are commercially using it and how consumers are leveraging it, for instance, to find recommendations on products and services. But the technology behind it has been around for a while. So if we think about natural language processing, if we think about machine learning, these are things that probably many of us have been using in our day-to-day work, whether we knew it or not, for well over a decade. But what we've seen in the last couple of years, Michael, is the size and speed, or the scale and speed of how generative AI has impacted our work is like nothing I'd ever seen. So I joke that sometimes I feel like the Forrest Gump of digital media. I was there in the early ad tech days. I was there in early digital media. I was on the founding team of Hulu, so early streaming. I had a startup that was focused on China as China really started to take over consumer spending globally. None of it compares to the reality of how generative AI has essentially washed over our businesses, our enterprises. Just as an anecdote, I had a call with a client about a year ago. We were launching a new service called GeoSite, which is essentially a way in which you can optimize your visibility and favorability on the LLMs. And the client asked me why we were doing it so late. We were actually the first company to offer a product like this in the market, but they were surprised it took us so long. And I said, well, yes, there are, whatever, 500 million consumers now using LLMs for search purposes, but 2 years ago there were zero. Right? So the concept of the scale within that narrow context window is just phenomenal, right? So for all of us, it's really about how do we reorientate ourselves to something that has become so meaningful so quickly? What does that mean for our organizations, for our teams, for our clients? It's and knowing that whatever we do today in 6 months will probably be outdated.
Well,
So
I was gonna ask. So I feel like I had two follow-ups on this sort of framework. Is there like one moment in the last, like I feel like when it came out, it was what, November 27th, 30th of,
yeah,
2022, so or 2023. So the degree to which like I feel like the first intro was like, hey, I can write this really funny like Shakespearean email or like all the different ways. Then all of a sudden it morphed into, okay, what does this look like in enterprise settings? But like, is there a milestone when you think back in the last 3 years where like just an inflection moment besides the launch?
yeah. So for us at Edelman, we had launched a platform called TrustStream, which we'll talk about in a little bit, where essentially we're able to predict changes in trust for a brand or for a corporation well before you actually see it in, for instance, quantitative research, and then we can dial into exactly what the causes are and the impact, for instance, of an our media story or of a social post. And we had certain levels of accuracy, both in terms of the predictability and in terms of our ability to accurately quantify impact to a particular article or tweet. And we had spent 2 years building bespoke models. We implemented 4.0 and it just blew away prior accuracy in both predictions and the accuracy of the impact in ways in which it was just very clear that what our team had done over 2 years, millions of dollars, countless thousands of hours of development time and data science time were basically rendered useless or antiquated overnight by a simple implementation of an API.
So I was gonna ask, so obviously you guys did everything perfectly over the last 3 years, and there was no like changes that were made, and you anticipated every
Only a
model
thousand changes.
development. I mean, the
Only,
clairvoyance was amazing. Uh, but like, how have you like mentally adjusted, or how do you, from a team leadership standpoint, like think about just how fast things are changing, like this sort of avoiding the sunk cost fallacy?
Yeah. So one of the key elements for me is I think about strategy as something that should be more like the climate, and the tactics that we use should be more like weather, and that it can change very quickly, whereas climate should be more stable. So whether it's for the AI and product organization at Edelman or now for Edelman itself, where I'm driving the overall transformation, we want to know what our true north is. We want to understand where we're trying to get to over a 2 year, 3 year time horizon, even 12 months. And then we understand that day in and day out, things are just going to change. And the assumptions that we make in terms of what we can do with generative AI today will just be fundamentally different. So part of it is also building better relationships with the open AIs and the Microsofts of the world so that we have peeks into what their product roadmap looks like. So we're not building something that in 6 weeks or in 6 months they're likely to launch as a simple feature on a current platform. Understanding who the best of breed partners might be that are building defensible positions that will be value add for our clients, that won't simply be subsumed by features within Claude or ChatGPT. But it's definitely not an exact science. And per your point, you have to be ready to burn the boats. You can't assume that just because you made the investment, you should continue it because you're gonna be proven wrong time and again.
Yeah, I think for us, it was the launch of 4 or 5 and the ability to work with tabular data that was transformative. So for us, with like the economic data, the ability to do comparative economic analysis, either across regions or to do comparative economic analysis of like subcomponents of consumer sentiments, like what are your current conditions versus future expectations over the next 12 months. Like I think that was the mind-blowing moment, but it feels like with each model, and it's obviously not just within OpenAI's world, the Gemini 3 launch here over the last few weeks, like it's this rapid pace of change. So maybe as a like table setter here and to kind of abide by the overarching framework for the AI spotlight, do you mind sharing with us kind of how you've approached AI and the work that you guys have done and what you're building and what you guys see coming in the future?
Yeah, funny you should ask. I actually have slides.
We were
I,
somewhat
I,
coordinated.
this is not going to be as I'm going to make sure this is not an infomercial for Edelman, but hopefully actually valuable to the folks on the call. So I am pulling up.
And as you're doing this, just for folks that are joining or joined a little bit later, we're going to try and incorporate questions into the dialogue in the stream here. So if there's things that come up, and obviously if there's very specific things, we'll follow up out of the Q&A.
Okay, so can you see the slide that says
Yep,
building the
everything looks good.
All right, so I'm going to walk through this very quickly. And again, this is not meant to be an infomercial. This is just to give a peek into the mind of how we've operated. So there's an advantage to our company, which is we're privately held. There's no debt on the books, so we're not operating under 90-day windows. We're not trying to create cash flow to pay down debt. So we're typically thinking on 12 and then 36-month time horizons, and that's enabled us to build an AI COE of roughly 60 people, and that includes product managers, data scientists, and developers, but also transformation consultants, what we call AI builders, and strategists who are really just fundamentally there as force multipliers within the organization. And the work that we've done on some of our biggest accounts has actually seen through this group 50% average productivity gains on roughly 200 custom models that we've created through that center of excellence across those bigger accounts. So we're seeing the team help in efficiency, but also in driving value. And one of the areas that we've also focused pretty assiduously on is how we impact the larger workforce. So when I got this job, my CEO asked me how many resources we would need, and I said enough to be effective, but not so many that people could think that we were going to do their job for them. So really, the primary purpose of the team is also to empower our staff so that they have the skills. We built, as a force multiplier, a team of roughly 300 plus ambassadors. So these ambassadors work across geographies, they work across what we call sectors, as well as our client bases. And it's their job to radiate out the capabilities, the knowledge bases, the tools, the workflows that we're creating centrally into those local teams. They carry that as a KPI. It's part of how they're goaled and how they're compensated at the end of the year. And they've really been instrumental in getting to what we have right now, which is roughly 90%, over 90% now weekly active users of our enterprise platform. So we're seeing really good adoption. And the teams themselves have created now over 10,000 custom GPTs on top of the foundational GPTs that the COE is setting or building. So think about this as a team member in Germany who wants to make a certain process that they do every day for the client more accurate, more effective, more efficient. They're able to now build this on their own. We vet those, we take the best versions of those, we bring them back into the center so we can push those back out to the teams. But this is a way in which we can work with them.
For the bottoms up piece of it, have you noticed any trends from, what staff are most engaged or characteristics among staff that are most engaged?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. So we have seen the greatest. So we have roughly what we call levels 1 to 8 at the company. One would be somebody leaving college. 8 would be our CEO. And it's really been in the 4 to 5 range where we've had the greatest adoption. So our hypothesis going in was that AI would be something that would really start to hollow out that level because a lot of what they do is manage process. Think about that as like a director or a VP. But what we've actually seen is them diving in and being some of the best users of the platforms, which has been really kind of educational for us in terms of how we think about what the organization of the future actually looks like.
Yeah, I think we've been surprised how much of that is a continuum to your point. Like, obviously, folks coming right out of school and probably presumably having used a number of these tools while in school, but also to some of our most experienced specialized staff have, been yearning for this type of capability or to automate some of those rote tasks. And it's been interesting to see that it's every level has had a huge impact on it.
Yeah, I mean, I can give you, two ends of the barbell. I have a friend who runs a communications firm, and his firm, when they're interviewing college graduates, they ask them how they used generative AI to cheat on their exams in college. And if they don't have a good answer, they won't hire them, which I thought was pretty interesting. We also have an executive vice president at Edelman who a few months ago was involved in a CEO resignation and the naming of a new CEO by the board. And this was essentially like a 3 day long weekend where he and the team worked on that transition, and it included board materials and employee communications and press releases and Q&A and LinkedIn posts. And what normally would have taken a team of 12 all weekend, he did with one other senior executive. And they did that through the use of our foundational GPTs, the models that we created. So he had analysis helpers. He had partners in the writing of content, in the customization of that content for different social platforms. And he said for him it was just easier because his ideas were directly imputed into the revisions, and it was also done instantaneously. So he saved a lot of time, but he also got a lot more value. So I've seen it for really junior people, but also for the most senior people at the company. We're going to touch on this in a second, but also some proprietary tech we've created internally, principally something called TrustStream, and then Archie, which is the LLM that actually drives the TrustStream platform. I thought I'd give a little bit of a PSA for Morning Consult, who's been a great partner of ours. When I started running the product team, we were running our own surveys. So we were essentially asking questions around trust globally for a certain number of our clients. What we found in partnering with Michael and the Morning Consult team was just much more respondents per brand, much greater depth by geography, many more brands we could launch more efficiently, and ways in which we could cut the data to get to even better understanding of what drives trust and what matters for our client than we ever could have gotten to on our own. So, Edelman, we have our own ETM survey platform. It's very good for specific purposes, but for this, Morning Consult was, we thought, the best in the world. And what Morning Consult has enabled us to do, and you're seeing a little bit of it here, this is for one of our clients in the QSR space, we're able to identify how trust is moving for the brand overall, chronologically, but also what that means, for instance, for the Gen Pop versus Boomers versus Gen X versus Gen Z. And what we're then able to do is attribute impact to specific moments. So specific events. What you're seeing on the bottom is a look at different events impacting the brand. And we can start to then see, okay, well, this event impacted Gen Z by 5%. This impacted overall, Gen Pop by 3%. And we can start to break it apart and really find detail. And then we can take it one level deeper and get into the specific articles or the specific posts, the specific influencers or creators who are actually making that difference. It puts us in a really different position as partners to our clients where we're not discussing things post facto. In the moment, we're actually able to dive in and help them navigate challenges, but also really interesting opportunities. Where we're going at Edelman is something we call the earn flywheel. And this is really a way in which we can identify cultural insights. Those insights can lead to earn first ideas. We can validate and drive those earned ideas through different channels. We then can create content, distribute the content, and finally on the back end have both real-time optimization, but also attribution. So think about this as a closed loop. So Publicis talks about essentially a push model regarding a paid flywheel. This is a pull model. This is where an earn first idea, so an idea that's not, think about earn not as a channel, but as a strategy, is proven to align between a brand and an audience. And then we can drive this through the flywheel to actually impact those audiences through the different channels that matter to them. We're already using Morning Consult data, both what I shared earlier, like the trust data, but now we're also starting to use purchase consideration data, et cetera, so that we can start to better identify, again, things like attribution further down funnel and cultural insights. So how do we start to think about predictive trends? Which trends are likely to be commercially valid for brand A versus brand B? How do we start to think about the influencers, the creators that we might partner with? Who are the right journalists we might pitch on the idea? How we might amplify these through paid? The data that we're getting from Morning Consult is really becoming like atomic level, oxygen that actually feeds the entire ecosystem. So we're really pleased with the partnership. It's it's starting to really drive a lot of how we're thinking about the use of data. And back to the generative AI point, the way in which we can synthesize and integrate that data into a larger data set and make it really useful and not just correlative, but actually starting to get to cause and effect is something we just couldn't have done a couple of years ago. So it's a new dawn for all of us.
Yeah, I think that's from our perspective, it was a really kind of self-reflection of there's so many different ways you can use this data set. And so for us is like, how do we get the right investment in the data infrastructure to go along with the longitudinal data and the continued expansion? I think what's been exciting to see is, we're building out the structure and we obviously can distribute that data through APIs or other means. But then, to watch you guys build on top of it, it's just really exciting. I think this is the collaboration piece, and you guys obviously pass back plenty of feedback to us of like, hey, have you thought about adding these data sets to the daily tracking or these brands? And I think that component to us from a true partnership standpoint has been so powerful. And, from our kind of 3-year outlook, I think we look and say, like, to your point, like the ability to add more economic or geopolitical data into the mix is something that we've been trying to lay the foundation on. But I guess I was curious from your perspective as we kind of look out. So if we use this like it's been 3 years since ChatGPT 3.0, and maybe that feels like 3 decades, maybe that feels like 3 minutes in this era, and probably depends on the moment. If we're talking 3 years out, and hopefully we're talking more often than that, maybe we've gotten to like season 2 of The Simpsons, so it's gotten really good. But like, what are like the milestones or the big kind of inflection moments that you see in that kind of 12, 24, 36 months, to your point about kind of thinking about more of the atmosphere while recognizing the tactics and the weather might change?
Yeah, I mean, we believe in an agentic future. I'm not stating anything that is, in fact, I say that and I almost feel like I'm a walking cliche. But we actually do. So a lot of the way that we're building at Edelman is just fundamentally around how do we stitch together agents to optimize workflows to make them more efficient, but also more effective. And I think about it almost like a Lego set where the Lego, we can add more pieces. It gets a little bit more sophisticated. It can build more complex or interesting things. That's kind of what we're doing now at the firm. So if you were to look back 6 months ago, we saw how AI could impact roughly 70% of the work we do at the company, mostly text-based, right? The things that we know that LLMs are really good at. That number is rising precipitously as we start to see advances in video and image and audio and other things as well. So I think where we are in a couple of years is the human is there to inject taste and judgment into the system, but the primary work will be done by the AI. And we're thinking already about what does that mean in terms of account staff versus subject matter experts versus how and where the work gets done because places like New York and London and Chicago are really important to be for our clients, but they're not important to get the work done. And then the question just becomes, does the work need to even get done in Mumbai or in Saskatchewan, or could it get done in the cloud?
Yeah, I think we talk a lot about on the technical side of like writing about economics is not something that is like, you know, easy copy and oftentimes not very accessible copy to like non-economists. And so one of the things we keep thinking about is like how did that agentic future take like multi-step tasks but make it more accessible to a broader set of business users. It's one thing to write for the Federal Reserve. Like we're grateful of our partnership with the Fed, and it's wonderful to talk at Bayesian models and whatnot. But that's maybe not the same like tone or frame for the data with a CFO. And so I think one of the areas that we're excited about the agentic piece is like you can take very technical writing, but also start to make it more accessible. I guess I was curious as you're thinking about like some of the extensions you mentioned before purchasing consideration, but like, are there like holy grails of where you see like that's a moment where like, wow, we've gotten to that point?
Yeah, so for me, I sold a company to Weber Shandwick in 2017, and Weber is a competitor to Edelman. And my first day on the job, I had to learn what earned media was. I had no idea what earned media actually meant. And there was a question that I had on day one, which is why are our primary KPIs things like impressions and articles and share of voice, and why aren't they things like sales and market share and profit margin? And my holy grail since the day I started was and is how do we use communications and earned to both prove and improve the business value of our clients and not just like reputational value? Those things are important, but what I'm looking at AI to do, and the reason why I walk through the earned flywheel is fundamentally what we have to be able to do is prove the business value of our work in a way in which we can increase the pie. So just fundamentally, our clients and probably the clients of our competitors spend anywhere between call it 3 to 7% of their overall marketing budget on earned first ideas or communications. That number should probably be about 15%, which would increase the size of our industry by 2 to 3x. So, part of the goal for me in all of this is I don't want to be the nicest house on a lousy block. I want to make sure that the block itself is nice and that all of us are helping grow the industry. So, where I think this gets us is a place where we can build media mix models, attribution models, optimizations that get us out of how do we get more article impressions, how do we get more placements, and into how do we steal market share from competitors, how do we grow sales, how do we increase profit.
Are there, I guess, a case study that comes to mind where you've seen this done really well and telling that story to the CFO? Because I think that's the other part. Like we get asked increasingly now by like investor relations, like, hey, we need an earnings prep pack. So can you put together like all the quantitative economic data and the brand data? But I guess I was curious, like, and that seems like it's a sort of expanding partnership between, communications, public affairs leaders and the office of the CFO. But I guess I was curious on your end, are there
Yeah,
things?
so
Yeah.
one of our biggest hurdles is that oftentimes CCOs just don't see it as their job to drive sales, and these are some of the biggest, most important companies in the world. In fact, we had a client where it's a in the it's a company in the furniture space where we were able to build an attribution model for them to show how essentially a 1%, 1 point rise in trust was equal to a 100 million euro growth in sales. And we could show them how you could break down trust into the discrete pieces and how you can use, different, tools at their disposal, tools being, earn strategies, media, et cetera, to drive that trust. And the initial reaction from the CCO was, that wasn't my job. That's not my job. That's really interesting. As we start to work with them, we start to get them comfortable with the place that, no, actually, this could be, right? So this is a way in which you're no longer having to fight for budget. You can actually go back to the CFO and go back to the
Yeah,
CEO,
it's deeply empowering.
like, right, how this moves the needle for you. So for me, this goes back to the something I said earlier, which is earned communications. Earned is a strategy. It's how you build organic alignment between a brand and an audience. It's not a channel. And once we get people into that mindset, they start to see, okay, well, now it's about ROI. Well, how do I get to ROI? Well, I need to have attribution on the back end. I should know what my media mix looks like predictively. I should have the right idea up front, and I should be able to validate that idea through synthetic audiences and other things. So it starts to become the starting point or the kernel that grows into something far larger.
All right, so we did it. We got through the very first spotlight. Obviously, they can connect with you on LinkedIn, but if folks want to learn more about Edelman's work on AI, where should they go?
Well, we have an Edelman AI page, edelman.ai, or you can simply reach out to me, Brian.Buchwald at edelman.com. Happy to talk to you, even if you work at a competitor. Again, let's make the whole block better, not just our own house.
And to that end, we'll be posting this on the Morning Consult YouTube page. And I know a number of questions. We must have done enough right in the first episode. Folks wanted to have a transcript or a video. And so we obviously want to build a better block. And we're focused on doing that through partnerships. We really appreciate the chance to partner with you, Brian, and Edelman at large. So thanks for the time and really appreciate everyone that joined us here this morning.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.